Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind Body Hurt podcast. I am your host, Mia Schick, registered holistic nutritionist. Today, we're going to be talking all about digestive health. So, one of my favorite subjects, and I think gut health is just so important. And we really think about it, everything in our body comes back to our gut. It's how we break down and absorb our food. If things are off in our digestive system, it's going to have a ripple effect on pretty much every other area in our body. Everything from our mental, our emotional health, our hormonal health, metabolic health, our immune system, nervous system, everything is all connected. So almost kind of when in doubt, come back and look after your digestive system. So today we're going to take a deep dive into gut health, and we're going to talk about what that really means, why it matters. We just talked about a few of them. We're going to talk about the north to south digestive process, so how digestion really should be working. Key areas of digestive health, including things like stomach acid, enzymes, gut lining, the microbiome, how to support common imbalances and what causes them, and really just learning about how to optimize our nutrition to help optimize our digestive system. So we already talked about some of these, but why does digestive health matter? So 70% of our immune system is housed in the gut. So if you have an autoimmune condition, come back to the gut. If you're somebody that's getting sick all the time, we want to come back to the gut. 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. So if you're somebody struggling with anxiety or depression or low mood, we want to be looking there. Nutrient absorption. So like I mentioned, everything in our body is built off of what we consume and how we digest it and break down and actually absorb it. So if you have things like nutrient deficiencies, low iron, low mineral status, we want to be looking at the digestive system. If you suffer with histamine issues, which has become more and more talked about and more common, and I keep seeing that in my practice, oftentimes having poor digestive health can be a big contributor there. We need it for detoxification and elimination, for blood sugar support. So there are certain bacteria that helps to regulate our blood sugar. It helps with insulin, our hormonal health. So two of the main ones that I think about with digestive health, one is estrogen. So we have a whole collection of bacteria in our gut called the estrobolome that helps to break down, detoxify, metabolize estrogen. So if we have symptoms of high estrogen, so things like lots of breast tenderness before a cycle, maybe we're getting a little bit of bloating or swelling, things like fibroids, cysts, those sort of things, then I think about higher levels of estrogen. Thyroid hormones would be the other one too. So our thyroid hormones are converted in the gut and the liver, so definitely something to think about. And our nervous system. So our gut and our brain are very much interconnected. And so both of them, our gut influences our brain and our nervous system and vice versa. So what are the biggest signs of digestive dysfunction or gut dysfunction? I think some of them are very obvious. Like we know when something is a little bit off in our gut. If we have lots of bloating, I will say with bloating is that some bloating is going to be normal. If you have some gas and bloating at the end of the night after a full day of eating, or if you're eating lots of different types of plants, you're getting lots of fiber in, that is normal. And especially if you're passing that gas and it's not just kind of staying there and making you feel really bloated and distended, then that can be okay. And I always say, no matter who you are, if you're eating a lot of broccoli and quinoa and kale and stuff like that, you're probably going to have some gas and bloating. But if you are someone that's waking up and you're bloated before your day even starts, you get out of bed and you're bloated. If you drink water and you feel bloated, if you're bloated consistently all throughout the day, or you do get a lot of distension happening in the gut too, so after lunch, if you feel like you have to undo your pants, then that might be a sign that there is maybe some imbalances or bacteria imbalances that are going on underneath that you may need to look into a little bit more. Diarrhea, constipation, and then we can look at other things too that we might not necessarily correlate with our digestive health. So things like brain fog, extreme fatigue, skin issues like acne or psoriasis or rosacea. In a lot of those cases, if someone's coming to me looking for support, oftentimes we look at the digestive system because that really can manifest as a lot of skin issues. Food intolerances are another one. So if you find you're allergic to a lot of food, or a lot of food is causing you symptoms, that would be something I'd look at. Hormonal imbalances, like we talked about. So there's a huge connection with our hormones and our digestion, which I just mentioned. So in certain cases like PCOS or Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, endometriosis, I always include a gut piece and looking after the gut with clients who struggle with those things. Other ones might be things like sugar cravings, anxiety, joint and muscle pain as well. All kind of come back to what's going on underneath the hood, so to speak. What are the most common causes of gut imbalances? So for most people, when your digestion's a little bit off, it's going to be a number of different things. Usually there's a few layers involved in there. So a few things that I think about are it's obviously going to be our diet and what we're consuming. So if we're consuming a lot of sugar and processed foods, alcohol, things that have a lot of gums and fillers and artificial sweeteners, that all can be really irritating to the gut. Antibiotic use. So this is a question I ask all my clients, especially if they're struggling with digestive issues. Have you been on antibiotics in the last 2 or 3, or even within the last 5 years? Also, what was it like when they were a kid? Were they somebody that got sick all the time, and did they take a lot of antibiotics? You could even add another layer on if someone was born via C-section or not. Actually, being born through a vaginal birth helps to regulate the gut and helps with building up the microbiome as well. So sometimes people that were born C-section, especially little kids in the first few years of life, can struggle with digestive issues. Low stomach acid can also be another one. We're going to talk about that north to south. So oftentimes if we don't have enough acidity in our stomach, that can lead to downstream impacts, things like SIBO and candida overgrowth, those sorts of things. Birth control is a really big one too. So more specifically, the pill and things like the IUD, those could play a part with digestive issues, but the pill, because it's going through our system and our digestive system, has a little bit more of an impact and can actually throw off the balance of good to bad bacteria and the diversity of the microbiome. So with anyone on birth control or looking to come off of birth control, you really want to put a big emphasis on gut support. Poor sleep, too much sanitization, if we have inflammation happening in the body, high stress levels, nervous system dysregulation, all of those things can play a part in why our gut might be feeling a little bit off. So I just wanted to start before we kind of get into some things around some supports on it, is sometimes it can be a little bit confusing, especially if you're doing any self-diagnosing, which I know a lot of us do, and we want to try to figure things out on their own. It can be a little bit tough to know whether we need to start with foundations first or if we need a more advanced protocol. Often with foundations first, if your symptoms are mild or moderate, there's no kind of glaring red flags, like I mentioned, there's not a lot of distension, or you're not running to the bathroom multiple times a day, there's blood in the stool, those sorts of things. If you're someone that's very high stress, go, you don't have a lot of routine, your meals are irregular or inconsistent, or your bowel movements are inconsistent, and you haven't kind of tried the basics around building out balanced meals and mindful eating, then I would start with your foundational pieces first and foremost. Deeper, more targeted protocols. So that might maybe look like something like an anti-candida protocol or a SIBO protocol, or just overall optimizing the gut, doing something like a 4R protocol, which I'll talk about. So that's kind of removing things that are irritating, replacing it with things that are nourishing and supportive, replenishing the bacteria and repairing the gut lining. That requires a little bit more of time and attention when you're doing something like that. So if symptoms, again, more targeted approach, if symptoms are chronic, severe, or just getting worse, you're not getting any relief within the first month, 6 weeks. The bloating, as I mentioned, again, extremely painful, happening with almost everything, even if you're drinking water. If there's ongoing diarrhea, constipation, if you're having chronic reflux or nausea, food reactions, if you have had a history of food poisoning, antibiotics, parasitic infections, H. pylori, autoimmune disease, anemia, those sorts of things, then still we want to I would say, work on the foundations, and then you want to come over to these more targeted protocols. So one thing I did want to talk about before we dive into a couple other things is actually the gut-brain axis. Thanks to my friend Dr. Rachel Levink, I recorded a podcast around digestive health with her, and it's been a very popular one. So she's a naturopathic doctor that focuses on digestive health and IBS and constipation, and she talks a lot about the gut-brain axis. So if this is something that's interesting to you, then go back and listen to our podcast. It's a few episodes ago, but really talks a lot about how our gut and our brain are in constant communication, and that our gut actually sends more signals to the brain. So when we're really looking at supporting the overall digestive system, we're also looking at supporting the nervous system. So the two of them talk together through something called the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that kind of connects a very long nerve that connects all different parts of our bodies together. And so it can influence different things. And so they talk to each other through the vagus nerve, through things like inflammation, immune signals, and also the microbiome and hormones. So really something to think about if, again, nervous system is off or anxiety, those sorts of things, and I want to come back to this connection. Let's talk about the north to south digestive process. So things that we should be thinking about. This is something I actually explain to clients in a session, typically when we want to have a better understanding of digestion and things that we should be thinking about as a whole. So we can't just kind of take parts of the digestive system and just look at it from one singular thing. We have to look at how everything is connected and how different things are influencing the other. So the first and foremost, the first place that we start to think about digestion, getting things moving, is in our brain. So when we start to see food, smell food, think about food, maybe we're starting the cooking process, that all starts to get that digestive process going. So our mouth maybe starts to water a little bit more. Our digestive juices are starting to get go because we have that anticipation of food. That is hopefully going to happen, especially if we're hungry, right? Second piece is our mouth. So chewing foods, saliva, those enzymes start to break down specifically carbohydrates right in the mouth, right? So one area of focus is to really go slow, chew your food, chew it really good, just to help kickstart that digestive process. Then we have the stomach. So the stomach, that is where we should have strong acidity in our stomach to help churn and break down our food. That's where enzymes and protein breakdown, that kind of starts to begin. And we also want to have that protection to help kill off pathogens and help prevent things like bacteria overgrowth as well. So we really want strong stomach acid. I would say in a lot of clients that struggle with digestive issues, a lot of them don't have strong digestive capacity or strong digestive fire, meaning that we don't have potentially enough acidity happening in the stomach. So one potential thing that you could do, or a couple that you could do, is you could add some acidity to your meals, like vinegar. I've had a lot of success with clients with 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in a small amount of water before meals. Really helps to increase that acidity in the stomach and break food down. We're going to talk a little bit more about hypochlorhydria in a little bit, so we'll save that. Then we have our liver and our gallbladder and pancreas. The other thing with the stomach, ensuring we have enough acidity there, is the food that's leaving the stomach and going into the top part of our intestine needs to be at a certain pH to trigger the release of enzymes. So another reason why it's really important to have that strong acidity. But that liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, this is where our bile and enzymes are released to help digest fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Then food moves to the small intestine. So this is where nutrients are broken down and actually absorbed into the bloodstream. Then we have our large intestine. So water, minerals are absorbed. Fiber potentially could be fermented by gut bacteria. And then we have elimination. So waste and toxins being excreted through bowel movements. So 2 places to really look at is if you have kind of that issues in that middle part, in maybe the small intestine and the large intestine, a lot of gas and bloating. Want to look at the first part, so chewing food really well, looking at making sure we have enough acidity in the stomach, but also on the other side of it as well, if there's constipation, that needs to be rectified before you go and look at more intense protocols with like elimination and maybe some eradication protocols there. So eradication meaning getting rid of certain bacteria strains. I did want to talk about the cephalic phase. So the cephalic phase is, again, that very first part of that digestive, which is triggered by that smell, thought, and anticipation of food. This seems like a really easy process, but it's very difficult for most people to get into. So this is activating the gut-brain connection and just getting the body prepared for food. So we want to be in that rest and digest phase. But for most people that I see, something that's really common is just like getting up in the morning, rushing around, and the whole day just kind of is busy, 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 and food becomes kind of an afterthought. Meals become an afterthought. So we're just grabbing things really quickly, eating food really quickly, and we're not really activating this cephalic phase in the body. But it's a free thing that you can do that makes a massive difference. But it takes some training, because as human beings, we are wired just to sit and eat as quickly and as much as we can, because in survival times when we didn't have food readily available, we didn't necessarily know when our next meal was going to be. So we're just ingrained. And especially if you're going too long between meals, or maybe undernourishing in the day as well, and you're going into meals feeling extremely ravenous, if that happens, you're going too long between meals. If you can't wait or take some time to sit and you're just shoveling food in because you're so hungry, you haven't eaten enough and you've gone too long between your last meal, right? So something that can be really helpful to practice this and bring that more mindfulness in is going into your meals feeling like a comfortable level of hunger. You should be ready to eat, thinking about food, starting to feel that hunger, but you shouldn't be so starving that you're like, oh my God, get food in me right now. I cannot wait one single minute, right? So it just gives you, when you're at that more comfortable level of hunger, you're able to make choices better. You're able just to sit, enjoy your meal a little bit more, go slow. So it does take a conscious effort. A lot of times I'll have clients print out a little check sheet, or maybe put a sticky note by their dinner table or on their fridge just to remind them to just go slow, right? Oftentimes we're at meal times and just like shuffling things into our mouths to get rid of the hunger, or because we're so starving. But just go slow, chew your food well, put your fork down, take a sip of water if you need it, check in with where you're at from your fullness levels too. So same thing on the other side, if you're somebody that overeats, quite often this would also be a practice to start implement, is just checking in, like, okay, how am I starting to feel? Am I starting to get comfortably full? Am I overly full? Because oftentimes when we eat, and again, eating too quickly and too much, then we're overly full too, right? So I say the ideal place to be is kind of, you're comfortably full, you're satisfied, you're not thinking about food, you're not hungry anymore, but we don't want to be absolutely stuffed to the brim, because that's very uncomfortable too. So we're looking kind of at a hunger fullness scale, going into meals, comfortable level of hunger, leaving it at a comfortable level of fullness. And again, that can take a lot of practice if you're somebody that ignores their hunger cues, or doesn't pay attention to them, or is eating at, irregular intervals, those sorts of things. Okay, so I wanted to talk about stomach acid in a little bit more detail here. So it's just some signs of low stomach acid. So that might look like a lot of bloating. If someone's eating especially meals that are higher in protein and they feel like it just sits there and isn't moving through their system, it just feels like a brick. Sometimes I find people that just naturally have an aversion to animal proteins. Often it's because of low stomach acid, which ends up being a catch-22, because we need enough adequate protein in order to actually create stomach acid. So we can end up being stuck in a little bit of a cycle there. So extreme reflux, acid reflux, if you're getting a lot of acid reflux, often we think acid reflux is too much acid, right? So we're taking these antacids, the PPIs, those sort of things, in order to lower the acidity. But oftentimes, more often than not, in those cases, it's because we don't have enough stomach acid. So then we're suppressing it even more and creating more issues along the line. What happens there is, if there's not strong acidity in the stomach, then certain foods they're not breaking down properly, and they start to putrefy and release gases that start to kind of bubble up and irritate the end of the esophagus especially, and kind of create a little bit of splashback there. So check that. Something that you can do, just a really easy test, is do some apple cider vinegar. And so if you don't have any burning sensation, then that most likely means that you have low stomach acid. If you are getting burning sensation, then it might be too much acid. You can also do this with HCl tablets, so hydrochloric acid. You can also test with that. You take one and you kind of just keep checking. You take one HCl tablet, see if you have any burning sensation, and kind of keep taking it until you get to a threshold where you do get that burning sensation, and it can tell you how low of the stomach acid you potentially could have. But obviously don't do that without a practitioner, otherwise you might hurt yourself. So a few things you can do to support stomach acid. A little bit of acidity to meals can be really helpful. So vinegar, citrus foods, so lemon and lime, those sorts of things can also be really helpful. Digestive bitters taken before a meal can just help the digestive system kind of waken up a little bit. Making sure you get adequate protein. You might look at something like a digestive enzyme as well. I have some in my FullScript account, so maybe I'll add a link to my FullScript below if you wanting to check out some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, or supplement supports there. And stress reduction is also a big one too. So when our stress levels are really high, our digestive system takes a hit because our body sees that as not being overly important to our survival. So it slows down digestion. Blood actually flows away from our internal organs to our hands and our legs so that we can run or fight whatever is going on. And that whole thing is just really slowed down. And it also can burn up nutrients in order to create stress hormones that could have potentially been used to make things like stomach acid and repairing the digestive system. Just two other little notes on there. If you have things like undigested food in the stool, or if you're really tired after meals, if you eat lunch and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I need a nap, you're burping quite a bit, or you have a lot of nutrient deficiency. So things like low iron, low B12, low zinc, low overall mineral status, most likely it's because you don't have strong stomach acid. So then we'll look at digestive enzymes and the pancreas. So enzymes are what helps break down carbohydrates and proteins and fats. So some signs of insufficiency could be things like, again, undigested food in the stool, lots of gas and bloating. So that might be, again, just coming back to proper chewing, maybe doing some enzyme support and those bitters too. So you kind of get the 2-for-1 there. Leaky gut. This is something that I get asked about all the time. Leaky gut, I think I have it. How do I heal it? And so leaky gut, just in a sense, is just intestinal permeability. So in our gut, we have these little microvilli, which should be really nice and tight junctions together. But for different reasons, from things like poor diet, too much alcohol, bacterial overgrowth, candida infections, those sorts of things, then we can start to get little gaps in there. And then what happens with that is that undigested food, or foods that's not been completely broken down and is their smallest form, ends up getting absorbed into the bloodstream, and our body starts to see those as pathogens and starts to kind of go into attack mode on them a bit. So leaky gut is something that I would think about with a lot of clients that have autoimmune conditions. Again, if you're someone with a lot of food sensitivities or things like acne or psoriasis, this is what I would come back to. But regardless of that, we should be looking, if we're looking at supporting overall digestive tract, one of the things that we should be looking at bringing in as a support is things that help to strengthen the lining of the gut. So that can be things like specific nutrients. Glutamine is one of my absolute favorite supplements. It's cheap, it's easy, it doesn't taste like anything. It's really easy to incorporate. It's an amino acid that helps to strengthen the lining of the gut. So helps with that leaky gut and tightening up those junctions. So I like it either first thing in the morning on an empty stomach or before bed on an empty stomach, and it just kind of helps it get to right where it needs. If in doubt, you could chuck it into a smoothie if you wanted to as well. Collagen can be really helpful. You don't necessarily have to get this from a supplement per se, but adding things like bone broth and getting some of those like meats that are slower cooked that have a bone in them can be really helpful too. Zinc is really important. There's some herbal supports that are really good for supporting the mucosal lining, which is also something to be thinking about as well. So the mucosal lining in the gut helps to protect the lining of the intestine too. So things like slippery elm and marshmallow root are also two of my favorites. There are certain supplements that you can get that have a combination actually of all of these different nutrients. So they might have glutamine, zinc in there, slippery elm, marshmallow root. And so again, you would take that either in the morning or at night before you go to bed. Very just soothing for the lining of the stomach, lining of the intestines too. So those are some of my favorite supports. Also, I would say on this one too, if we're looking at fiber supports as well, so things like flaxseed, chia seed, and psyllium husk. If you've ever seen these or just put those into water, we notice that they get that really gelatinous texture. That can be really, really good for the gut. And so we want some of those things in there. You want to soak them too, because then that's going to happen in your gut. If we're not actually pre-soaking those things, it's going to absorb a lot of water in the gut. But those really great supports with fiber and really good for soothing the gut there too. So throw those in your smoothies, on oats, yogurt bowls, those sorts of things. Supporting a healthy microbiome. So our microbiome is that balance of bacteria in our gut. So there's trillions and trillions of bacteria and fungus and other microbes that are housed in our digestive system, and they help to break down our food. They protect us from illness. They produce hormones like serotonin that support our brain and our mood. So how do we build that diversity? So one is actually getting different diversity in plants specifically. So there's some research saying that around 30 different types of plants per week can help build up that microbiome diversity. So while I think there can be, it can be helpful to have some routine meals that you go and lean on throughout the week to make take decision fatigue out of planning out your meals. I would encourage you just to like play around a little bit more. Try out different types of fruits and vegetables, add some different types of nuts and seeds and those sorts of things into the routine as well. And also eating seasonally too, right? I know in Saskatchewan here, we're heading into kind of the warmer summer months and different things are going to be available. I know I have some herbs going in my herb garden. Those sorts of things can be incredibly supportive for the digestive system. So go to your local like farmer's market, try out some different produce, those sorts of things. Fermented foods can be really great. So things like sauerkraut and kimchi, kombucha, kefir or kefir, yogurt, those sorts of things can be really good. You want to ideally have 1 to 2 servings of those per day to help build up. They are a good source of probiotics. If you're somebody that struggles with things like histamine issues, or if you do potentially have bacteria overgrowth or things like SIBO or candida, sometimes adding in more bacteria on top of bacteria overgrowth makes you feel even worse. So just pay attention if you're like, oh, I'm having some of these foods in my diet and I don't feel very good, then that might be a sign that there might be some dysbiosis happening there. And so ideally there you'll have to look at getting rid of or eradicating that potential bacteria overgrowth before you look at including fermented foods. I will say with probiotics, or same thing there, is just kind of either a hit or a miss. If you are taking a probiotic, again, on top of things like SIBO or candida, then it might do more harm than good. Sometimes a spore-based probiotic can be helpful and used in cases with things like SIBO, and you can incorporate it without kind of adverse effects. We don't need to be using really, really high. Sometimes I see people getting like the highest, like 50 billion CFUs. You don't necessarily need that. And for most people, that might actually cause more digestive issues. So probiotics kind of take with a grain of salt. I don't think it's necessary that everybody needs to jump onto a probiotic. Obviously, if you were on antibiotics, you want to get a higher potency one. But yeah, I don't think everybody needs to just jump into taking a probiotic right off the bat. Prebiotic fibers. So we have that bacteria in there. We want to feed them, help them proliferate. So things like garlic and onions, same thing there. If you're somebody that gets a reaction from eating garlic and onions, those foods are very high in FODMAPs. So specific carbohydrates that ferment in the gut and specific types of bacteria feed off of. So again, might be a clue that something else is off there. Leeks, asparagus, oats, flax, bananas, all really great sources of prebiotics. So we have probiotics, which is that good bacteria. Prebiotics helps to feed that bacteria. And a few other things, spending time outside, getting your hands dirty in nature. So especially gardening, walking barefoot can also be really helpful. So when we're gardening, we're kind of kicking up those natural microbes from the soil, breathing them in, we're getting them on our hands, touching our food and stuff like that with them. So it can just help to diversify that microbiome. And then of course, we just want to look at avoiding overuse of antibiotics, antacids, and even things like sanitizer. Next thing I want to talk about is elimination. So bowel movements, everybody's favorite topic. Elimination really, really matters. We need to be going to the bathroom at the minimum once per day. If this isn't happening, then you need to be looking at what's going on there and supporting that. Because that's really our body's natural detoxification process. That's how we get rid of excess hormones and waste and byproducts. So they're absolutely essential for hormone health, for digestive health, just overall well-being, making sure we have regular bowel movements. Ideally, 1 to 3 times per day is probably pretty average for most people, and it should feel like we don't have to strain, feels like it should be complete. A few tips just around this, especially with constipation, is you want to start with some of the obvious things first, is getting more fiber in, making sure you're hydrating really well, maybe getting some electrolytes in there. As well. And of course, eating enough. Sometimes I have people coming in and like, oh, I'm just not going to the bathroom, and they're really undernourishing. We need enough adequate nutrition for our digestive system to even be able to work properly. So really assess if you're consuming enough calories for yourself and your activity levels especially. So really, really look at that. And especially if you struggle with things like disordered eating, that would be another layer to just add in there and really be paying attention to. Routine is really key as well. So our body likes to go to the bathroom at the same time of day, eat foods typically at the same time of day, go to bed and wake up at the same time of day. So really, I would say, like, especially in the morning, that's where for most people that you should be having a bowel movement in the morning, whether after you've had maybe a glass of water or coffee or a meal, it stimulates that bowel movement. So I'm always an advocate of have kind of a warm room temperature glass of water right when you wake up. Oftentimes that can trigger a bowel movement. Sometimes eating a meal can trigger that. And then also just giving yourself time and space in the morning to actually go, right? So I find a lot of clients that I have that have constipation, they're just kind of get up, go in the morning, getting the kids' school lunches together and trying to fit in a workout and, rushing around in the morning. And then that carries on into the day. And that all kind of triggers our body to tells our body it's not safe to go to the bathroom essentially. So please give yourself some time, even if it's just going and sitting on the toilet in the morning for 10 minutes, just to help. That sometimes even that can help trigger a bowel movement. So, yeah, really important there. So fiber, we'll just talk about that quickly here. So the importance of fiber. Fiber is key for regular bowel movements, feeding that good bacteria, balancing our blood sugar, especially lowering things like our cholesterol levels, and then just supporting reducing bloating and detoxification. So the top fiber foods, that's going to be things like our vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, sweet potatoes, carrots. Fruits that are most specifically high in fiber are going to be things like berries, pears, apples, figs, and oranges. Our whole grains are going to have it. So things like oatmeal, quinoa, buckwheat, barley, anything in the bean and legume family, really great source of fiber, nuts and seeds. I mentioned a couple of my favorites: chia, flax seeds, almonds, sunflower seeds. Avocado is a really great one. And then psyllium husk, I know I mentioned that one too. That one you can get in a supplement form, and I love it. I think it's just so good for so many things. If you want to have the best bowel movements of your life, get some psyllium husk, but start small. Only start with like a teaspoon, put it in your smoothie or yogurt or whatever it is. Drink lots of water with it. Really great for helping with constipation, loose stools. It's low FODMAP, so it's not going to ferment in the gut, so shouldn't really contribute to bloating unless you're taking too much too. So with fiber, you might notice that if you're starting to eat a bunch more fiber than you're used to, you might have some gas and bloating until your digestive system balances out a little bit too. So just go low and slow with fiber. Ideally for women, you want to aim for minimum 25 grams, upwards of 35 grams per day. It can be tough to figure out how much fiber you need. So you could utilize something like Chronometer and maybe track your intake for maybe just a week to see where you are and make some adjustments, and then look at your meals and be like, okay, what else can I add here just to bump up the fiber a bit, right? You could also just chuck it into Chat GPT. So on occasion, I will do that where I'll just kind of outline what I've had and then just say, hey, give me an idea of like how much fiber or how much protein I've had. So just kind of spot checking. So I did want to talk about bloating a little bit more. So probably the most common thing I see in my practice is bloating. So this can come from things like eating too quickly, not chewing our food well enough, maybe overeating or eating too large of meals at once. Could come from things like food intolerances. So big ones being things like dairy or gluten or foods that are high in those FODMAPs, so high in those specific carbohydrates that cause that fermentation like we talked about. Low stomach acid, like we talked about, poor enzyme production. If there's constipation going on, imbalances in the gut bacteria, so things like dysbiosis, SIBO, candida overgrowth. It can also be linked to hormonal fluctuations, right? So for most women, you probably notice a shift in your digestion before your cycle. Progesterone can really influence our digestive system and really kind of almost relax the gut in a sense too. So oftentimes we really look at like very loose stools, especially before the period too. And then things like carbonated drinks, excessive chewing gum. I see it happen a lot with clients who are really coming from kind of the world of dieting or even bodybuilding, where they're having a lot of foods that have tons of artificial sweeteners in it. So artificial sweetened, like low sugar chocolates and pops and candies, those sorts of things can be extremely irritating to the gut. So artificial sweeteners and alcohols, I would say almost more so than things like aspartame and aspartame. There's another one starting with an S. I've lost my thought train around it, but sugar, alcohol, so erythritol, maltitol, those can be very, very irritating to the gut. So I typically tend to stay away from those completely. Stevia, monk fruits, I would say in small amounts are going to be okay. So those are sugar-free alternatives, more natural sources that aren't going to have such a big influence on the gut. And to be honest, I would rather have people just eat the real thing than supplement with these low calorie, low sugar options. Just have like a normal piece of chocolate that has sugar in it, or have things like maple syrup or honey, than always choosing the low sugar option. I know for me, that was an absolute game changer. Like I was on that train for so long, and everything I had, it was like, sugar-free pops, protein bars, protein powders, diet foods, those sorts of things that just had all of these artificial sweeteners, and I was just extremely bloated all the time. And so when I started to take that out and focus on more whole foods and letting some of those diet foods go, significant difference in my digestion. So coming back to how do you support bloating, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. Slow down, chew your food well, and practice mindful eating. So mindful eating to me is sitting down with your meals. So not kind of standing at your kitchen, not opening the fridge, picking at things, not, picking at food while you're even making it. It's like, be more intentional, make a nice, beautiful plate, sit down with it. Take in the tastes, the textures, the smells, tune in with how you're feeling, how full you're feeling. Don't chug a ton of water with it. It's just mindfulness, right? Not every single meal you're going to have the availability to do this, especially if you are somebody that has a very demanding job, or maybe you don't take a ton of breaks, or maybe you work in the restaurant industry where it's just kind of like shovel in what you can. So it's not going to work with every meal, but even if you can just practice this with one meal, maybe it's dinner, maybe it's breakfast, whatever it is, can make a massive difference. So you might also want to increase that acidity. So we talked about the apple cider vinegar, or maybe some digestive enzymes with HCl in it. Bitter foods, so things like arugula can be really helpful, lemon. And then, of course, coming back, if there are some significant issues, you're bloating after every single meal, you're waking up bloated, then that's where you want to take a deeper look. So just a few overround, we'll just give you some easy tips just to help support the gut. So sticking to whole foods versus processed foods. So a lot of processed foods have a lot of gums and fillers and additives and sweeteners and chemicals and preservatives and those sorts of things that can be really irritating to the gut. So if we're looking at foods that have one ingredient or they're minimally processed, I honestly, even before I look at nutritional value, like how much carbs and protein and blah, blah, blah is in them, I look at the ingredient list first and foremost. And so if there's a huge long list of stuff on there, and lots of gums and fillers and those sorts of things, and usually I will put it back. Sometimes having a few of those things in is not going to make or break anything, but you just want to be mindful of having that all the time. I will say on alcohol, I do think that you can have some alcohol as part of a healthy lifestyle in moderation. But if you are struggling significantly with your digestive health, then unfortunately, you're probably going to have to cut alcohol for probably minimum 3 months. I just don't think that it's even possible to have like sometimes clear alcohol with like some soda water or whatever sometimes could be okay, but for most people, it's just too irritating. It throws off that balance of bacteria, can just be cause too much inflammation. So on any gut healing journey, unfortunately, alcohol is going to be a no-go. Gluten, usually I'm not the type of practitioner off the first hop, especially around digestive issues, to give you a long list of foods that you need to eliminate. But in certain cases, sometimes gluten can be helpful because it can cause some irritation with people. But I oftentimes find that sometimes you might need to limit it for a certain period of time while you're supporting your digestive health, your digestive function. Maybe you're working through a specific protocol. Sometimes eliminating gluten in the time being can be helpful. And then once things are feeling good, then you could bring in something like sourdough, which is typically lower in gluten. The fermentation process helps to kind of eat up that gluten, or maybe doing something like a sprouted grain or Ezekiel bread or something like that, which is typically a little bit easier to handle. So doesn't always necessarily, unless of course you are celiac and have an allergy or sensitivity to gluten, doesn't mean that everybody needs to take it out. And same with dairy. Usually I find people like, well, I need to cut dairy and gluten. With digestive issues, not necessarily the case for everybody, right? And like I would look at bigger rocks as opposed to what I would call the smaller rocks first. So if you're I look at things like your alcohol intake, processed foods, the sugar, especially caffeine even, right? So look there first before we start going and nitpicking certain foods and you're like, oh, I need to take this and this and this out. That usually just gets people into overwhelm and just makes it hard to sustain it. Making sure you're hydrated, also really important. So electrolytes in your water sometimes can be helpful for the digestive process. You don't need to have one that's like extremely high in sodium. Some of the ones out there right now are really, really high sodium. So find a more balanced one that has some magnesium and has some potassium in it. That can be really helpful for stimulating peristalsis, getting food moving through the system. Carminatives, so things like peppermint and ginger and fennel, chamomile, certain teas can be really great. I like those at night. And that just helps food move through the system rather than just kind of stay there, food and gas. So it just helps getting things moved through the system. Are just a few things to think about there. So just kind of think about common patterns that you might see and kind of where to put your emphasis on a little bit more too. So if I'm thinking upper GI, so that's kind of the higher part of the small intestine, our stomach. So that's going to show up as reflux, burping, nausea, feeling really full really quickly. So in those cases, I would think stomach acid. I would also look at H. pylori. That was something that I should have mentioned with stomach acid. So H. pylori is a little bacteria that will wedge itself into the lining of the stomach and can really influence our stomach acid production. A lot of people actually carry H. pylori, but just don't have symptoms around it. But if you are somebody that does have a lot of acid reflux or burping, those sorts of things, then you would want to do some testing for H. pylori. You can get it done through your doctor, through a breath test or a stool test, just to rule that out because that needs to be taken care of first and foremost. I would also look at motility, bile, enzymes. The other thing, then we delve into the small intestine, so bloating, distension, food reactions. Then I would think about something like SIBO. Do we have enough enzymes that are being produced? What's motility looking like? Large intestine, so if we have changes in our stool, if it's certain colors, textures, whether it floats or sinks, that can be big signs of what's going on in the gut too, if it has lots of gas in it. Mucus. Another thing to be thinking about, that could be some inflammation going on. So in these cases, I would think about dysbiosis, maybe IBS, certain pathogens, maybe parasitic infections, those sorts of things. And then whole body too, right? So if we have skin issues, we talked about psoriasis, rosacea, acne, brain fog, fatigue, joint pain. Then I would come back to inflammation, the gut barrier, histamine issues, what our overall nutrient status is, and then our immune function too, all stemming from the digestive system. I'm just going to walk through some common diets used for digestive support and maybe share a few of my thoughts around them. As I mentioned, I'm not typically the practitioner to go in and be like, let's do elimination diet. Here's your candida diet. Let's, go really hard, really quick. Usually for most people, I would say we work on those foundation supports first and foremost. And a lot of the times that's balancing meals out, making sure we're getting enough fiber, enough protein, working on nervous system support, blood sugar regulation, and that will have a ripple effect on the digestive system. And in some cases, we might need to take a second step there and have a more of a targeted approach on the digestive system. But most common ones that I've seen in my practice or sometimes used in my practice are anti-candida diets or low FODMAP. So low FODMAP I would use with somebody who does have active SIBO, so small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. So that's when certain strains of bacteria that should have been in the large intestine have migrated over to the small intestine for some reason and proliferated and causing a lot of issues. Most of our bacteria is going to be in the large intestine. We will have some in the small intestine, but most of it is in the large intestine. And so if we start to get bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, that's when we run into issues. Low FODMAP, as I mentioned, is low in specific carbohydrates that tend to ferment in the gut. So that bacteria, that overgrowth of bacteria likes to feed off of specific carbohydrates. They produce gas, and that's what can lead to a lot of that bloating and distension. So typically with SIBO, you do low FODMAP. Low FODMAP is not a diet that is intended. Actually, any of these diets, for the most part, are not intended to be done long term because they are too limited. So when we talked about the beginning, some supports with the microbiome is having some diversity. So sometimes these specific diets are very limited, and in some cases can start to create some food fear around food as well. So I'm always just a little bit hesitant to throw people in them. But low FODMAP typically is done for, I would say, probably around 3 months while somebody is on that healing protocol. I work with a lot of naturopathic doctors, so typically I work hand in hand with them. The naturopaths are doing more of the treatment, and then I'm here for digestive support through their diet and lifestyle. So low FODMAP is used in that case, and then ideally they're getting back to a place where they're not having a lot of symptoms, and then we start to bring some of these foods back in. Intermittent fasting can be really helpful for digestive support. So for a couple reasons, sometimes when you're going a certain amount of time with no food, then it activates the migrating motor complex. So that's kind of the movement of the digestion, getting things moving through the system, which can be really important for that, especially with things like constipation too. With intermittent fasting, I don't like the typical skip breakfast, have lunch, and eat until 7:30, 8 o'clock. I actually think pulling the window back, eating a good breakfast, and pulling your eating window back at night is a much more natural way to eat. Essentially, you're eating with your circadian rhythm, and there's just so much benefit to eating, especially a high protein breakfast in the morning for hunger hormones, for cortisol levels, blood sugar regulation. That all is also going to affect the gut too. Low histamine diet. So high histamines that might show up as brain fog, things happening around your cycle. If you're really sensitive to stuff, if you're like, oh, I try a supplement and I react to it immediately, you have all these different food aversions and just find that you're just really reactive, then I would look into histamines. I'm not going to delve into that too much. We might save that for a whole other podcast, but I've been seeing histamine issues show up, I would say, especially with my ladies that are in their kind of mid 40s, maybe in that transitionary period into perimenopause with the fluctuating hormones that can actually trigger histamine responses. Also just paying attention to around our cycle too. So if you're getting a lot of symptoms showing up that week before your cycle, lots of brain fog, a lot of digestive issues, then that might be, histamines might be something to look into. Gluten and dairy free, again, and other common ones, elimination diets. I don't typically go there first thing. I don't think I've actually ever done an elimination diet in my practice. On that same note, food sensitivity testing, I get questions around that, whether it's worth it or not. I would say maybe if you are really working on your digestive health. I don't think doing a food sensitivity as a standalone is going to give you any information. It changes. I don't really know if there's a lot of validity or science or research backing them at this moment. And I think just giving somebody a long list of foods to stay away from really isn't addressing the problem, especially if they're struggling with digestive issues. It might help, again, temporarily relieve some of the symptoms, but essentially it's not addressing any of the root issues of why you're reacting to the food in the first place, right? So we need to be fixing that. Anti-inflammatory diets, Mediterranean diets, those are two great ones that I think can be implemented. So essentially just eating more whole foods, letting go of preservatives, eating foods that are high in protein, omega-3 fatty acids, lots of fiber, lots of color into the diet. So those I'm all for. So I hope you found that episode helpful and just gave you some ideas on where to start if you are struggling with digestive issues, because it can be very overwhelming. I know for me, when I was really struggling in my mid-20s with digestive issues, I was like self-diagnosing like crazy and felt like I had to cut absolutely everything out, and then I would get really overwhelmed and I'd feel guilty around eating certain foods. So just go slow, start with the foundational pieces. If you do need some support, I'm more than happy to help you on your journey and to help you with your own nutrition, maybe giving you some more targeted approach with supplements, with diet, with lifestyle, even giving you some advice around testing if it's warranted as well. So you're more than welcome to book in a session with me. I'll leave a link below. You can book a 60-minute consultation where we'll take a deep dive into everything that's going on. We'll look at a food journal and give you some really targeted supports and things to focus on, so you can feel better and have great digestive health. So thank you for joining me today. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, please do share this with somebody that might find this helpful. Let me know what you thought, if you had any questions, and I will catch you guys next week. Bye.